Thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have you here with us. My name is Joel Knudsen. I am a principal researcher at the American Institutes for Research, and I also chair the California Collaborative on District Reform. The California Collaborative is a learning community of district leaders, researchers, policymakers, civil rights advocates, support providers, funders that meet several times a year to dive into some of the specific problems of practice facing California school districts. And one of the consistent threads that's been true over the last couple of years is that districts are facing, in some ways, an unprecedented level of challenge, competing and mounting priorities on their time and energy, from the academic, social, and emotional learning needs of students to educator shortages to new state and federal programs that sometimes offer new resources to systems, but also create new reporting and programmatic requirements, all while grappling with financial uncertainty that comes with the end of one-time COVID relief funding and looking at financial realities and budget projections that might have districts tightening their belt. We know that school districts and school boards in particular played an instrumental role in establishing priorities and maintaining focus in their work. Yet there's surprisingly little that the general public and even members of the education community know about school boards. The research literature is surprisingly thin. And most of the stories we see in the news media are about stories of disruption and controversy. So we're really fortunate to have had the opportunity to dive into the example of two districts that really employ strategic and productive and collaborative approaches to school governance that have enabled those districts to establish and maintain focus in their work together. There's a report that we were able to release last month through the California Collaborative on District Reform, and we're thrilled today to have the superintendents from both San Jose Unified and Napa Valley Unified, and two trustees from those districts to be able to share their experiences. So we're going to get underway in just a moment and hear from the people directly engaged in this work to talk about their work. But to provide some framing and a foundation for the things that they're going to share with us, I want to turn to my co-author and colleague, Marina Castro, to briefly lay out what that report entails and to provide some context for what we'll hear from our panelists today. So Marina, let's turn to you.
Thanks, Joel. And thanks everybody for being here. To write this report, Joel and I conducted interviews in summer 2023 with each trustee in NVUSD and SJUSD. We interviewed the superintendents from both districts, reviewed documents from both governance teams, reviewed some of the existing research on school boards, and we talked to other experts on school governance in California. We know school governance is vitally important, but like Joel said earlier, the literature is pretty thin, and we hope that through a case study like this, we hope to illuminate the often understudied and poorly understood dynamics of school boards. To start and provide some context for the report, I just want to highlight some key features that make school boards a unique fixture in K-12 systems. Many people, including people running for school boards, have a poor sense of what a school board actually does, and some of these key features are helpful to give some insight into that. For example, a school board's power only exists as a collective, meaning that they can only pass policy with the support of at least a portion of their colleagues. Boards also only oversee one employee in the entire district, the superintendent. And it's important to note that campaigning has a very different incentive structure than governing does. It's part of why some of these features aren't very well known to the public at large. And as their most important role, school boards are in charge of developing and adopting district policy, not implementing that policy. And confusing those things and navigating them in practice can be confusing and lead to some tension if not done well. Given the generally misunderstood role of the board, our interview participants told us about the critical importance of onboarding and orienting new trustees to their role, both to clarify what their role is and isn't, and to reorient the entire team each time there's a new composition of members so that everyone's on the same page. Interview participants also shared that a commitment to shared priorities enables a school board to stay focused on issues related to improving teaching and learning and helps them maintain a coherent vision for the whole district. Similarly, we also heard about the importance of a shared commitment to norms of behavior and working together that give governance teams a clear set of role expectations and protocols that are nice to have in good times, but especially vital in times of tension and disagreement. The superintendents told us too about the philosophies that each of them bring to their work with their boards and why their approaches to cultivating relationships with each trustee and sharing information fully and transparency has served them well, despite sometimes getting advice to do the opposite. In each district, we also heard about times when there has been a lot of tension in the community and within the board itself, which is inevitable in a lot of communities. And the full report has more details about how these two districts navigated those times. The report concludes by identifying several lessons for governance teams in other contexts. We think the stories of NVUSD and SJUSD emphasize the value of a few key things. The value of establishing shared priorities and norms for working together, the necessity of tending to relationships. Another lesson we took away was board members ought to be sufficiently informed and armed with district data to make consequential decisions for students and families in their communities. And that board members need to engage with the public, both to get a sense of the community's needs and to communicate to the public what a collaborative governing team can actually do for a school district. And above all else, our interviewees shared with us that good governance takes constant work. You'll hear about that later today. It doesn't happen naturally or by accident. The practices I described and that people will go into more detail about today happen through focused time, intentionality, and hard work. So if you're interested in learning more after hearing from our panelists today, you can find our full report on our website, cacollaborative.org. And before I hand it back to Joel, I also want to highlight a companion piece we wrote alongside the full report. As Joel mentioned, the California Collaborative is a learning community, and we believe that learning happens and problem solving happens best when it includes diverse perspectives. So consistent with that point of view, our companion piece features the insights and reflections on our full report from 4 respected members of the California K-12 education community. Mike Kirst, Professor Emeritus at Stanford University and former president of the California State Board of Education. Gabriela Maffei, Superintendent of Garden Grove Unified School District. Rick Miller, Executive Director of Core Districts and former trustee in Rockland Unified School District. And Mauro Cifuentes, Co-Executive Director of Californians for Justice. We believe that their words will amplify and complement our report, and you can also find that on our website too, cacollaborative.org. And now I'll hand it back to Joel so we can hear from the NVUSD and SJUSD governing teams.
Thanks so much, Marina. And I think what Marina just highlighted about the companion piece is acknowledgement that Napa Valley Unified and San Jose Unified operate in particular contexts and build on the strengths of strong governance practices that go back many years. So as we engage in this discussion with our panelists, we want to learn from the things that they've been able to do, but also try and draw out what are the lessons that can apply to other contexts that might be starting in a different place than these districts are starting. I'm really delighted to introduce our panelists, and I'll just go in the order I see them on my screen. Robin Jacobitz is a trustee in Napa Valley Unified School District. Rossana Musetti is the superintendent in Napa Valley Unified School District. Jose Magana is a trustee in San Jose Unified School District, and Nancy Alberon is the superintendent of San Jose Unified School District. And I think you'll see in a minute how lucky we are to have them share their time with us and share their insights with us. I want to start with a piece that I led with, which was knowing and acknowledging that the pressures facing school districts might be more intense than ever. Too often we know these pressures lead districts to fragment their approaches to improvement, or in an attempt to address every concern that comes in front of them, to do none of those things well at all. And I think one of the striking takeaways from the report is the ability in both districts to create and maintain focus on a few key core issues. So the question I'd like to lead with is, what are your priorities as a district, and how did you land on those priorities? Maybe we can start with the team in San Jose Unified. Nancy and Jose, how have you established and how have you identified the things that drive your work as a governing team?
I can go ahead and kick us off. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to be able to share some of the practices that we engage in San Jose Unified. I think it's really, really important, particularly right now during this current political context, that we have some opportunities to share about the work and the learning here. In San Jose, we have a strategic plan like many school districts. There's a very clear vision and there's 5 objectives that really are written in a way that is very aspirational. It was captured in a process that we had where we engaged with over 3,000 stakeholders to be able to hear from our community what did they hope and dream for. And so we have had a lot of consistency with the 5 objectives, but specifically in San Jose, the board is really committed to the strategic plan. They expect all of the work that we do to be aligned to the plan. And their decision making really is about looking at data analysis, making sure that our initiatives are aligned to the strategic plan, and most importantly, that all of these initiatives that we engage in are connected to equity. We were one of the first districts in the state to have, and in the country, to have an equity policy, an equity board policy that calls for the allocation of resources based on need, and particularly where there is greatest need. And so we really use that strategic plan, and everything cascades from there. We have been, during COVID, there was a little bit of changes, but we have, been for the last couple of years, really been focused on early literacy and math and really changing outcomes for students there. The expansion of ethnic studies at the secondary level, and a uniform grading system in the area of academics. And then as far as our focus on social and emotional, we have really done a lot of work to respond to the need in front of us by implementing social and emotional curriculum across all of the schools, and also expanding wellness centers at all of our secondary schools. So it's still a work in progress. But I think the board has really been disciplined around staying consistent and true to those priorities, but it isn't easy. So I don't know if Jose, do you want to add from the perspective of a board member, like how hard is that?
Yeah, no, thank you. And thanks for everyone for joining us today. And I first want to say I'm really proud to serve with 5 phenomenal elected board, be a board of 5 phenomenal board members, my 4 other colleagues, with a fantastic superintendent, wonderful staff that are enabling us to do this fantastic work. When it comes to the governance side of things, I think our board is taking it's an informal approach to something that I call yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And Nancy's heard me talk about this when we're messaging to the community, is taking an approach of really reflecting on what happened yesterday, what happened in the past. So taking the learnings of the last 40 years where our district did experience things like bankruptcy and a court order from the court regarding segregation of our district, and taking the learnings that our other previous board members have taken into place at the forefront of our decisions. So as we are making decisions, we're taking that historical knowledge and that informal data to make decisions. And then for today, we take a look at, as Nancy was saying, our current data that we have, whether it's student performance data, community feedback, survey data, to say, here's the areas of opportunity that we really need to lean into and focus on as a district. And then really, as we look for tomorrow, what we really hope to say is, what do we want to see different? What do we want to see improved? What do we want to see updated in the future? And doing that, adding to Nancy's point around equity, we lean into the equity factor, obviously, because the data is clear that there are better ways that we can serve various communities that we serve, but also the equity piece that connects to that is just the sustainability of programs, and making sure that whatever we're doing is prudent, that is taking the prudent foresight of financial investments, of planning, of focus, so that we aren't eventually having to take things away or essentially be inequitable when we are making future decisions. So it is hard, as Nancy named, just because there's a lot of moving pieces. There's the pandemic had big impacts on our systems, but we as a board are laser focused on those areas, because we ultimately know, as a parent as well, as a former educator as well, that will lead to greater outcomes, not just for our students, but create a greater community and greater culture for our staff that just creates a better cohesion with our community of families and community members.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you, Nancy. Rosanna and Robin, I'd love to hear you talk about the approach to establishing priorities in Napa Valley Unified.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again so much for the opportunity to be here and talk about a topic we're very passionate about in NVUSD that we think is critical to impacting the educational lives of students, and that's governance, effective governance. So similar to what Nancy shared, we have a strategic plan. in Napa Valley Unified. It really is the roadmap for the governance work that we conduct. Something I'm excited to sort of elaborate on or share about that I think is unique to what we do in Napa Valley Unified School District is the idea that we really engage in a rigorous annual priority setting process. So we know that strategic plans that are adopted by organizations like San Jose Unified, like Napa Valley Unified, are usually adopted for 3 to 5 years, sometimes longer periods, in order to have longer range goals addressed over time. And in order to get even more specific and more active about the focus of an upcoming school year, the NVUSD Board of Education engages in this annual priority setting process. It's a process that we've partnered with the California School Boards Association to implement and refine over the last few years. Our annual priorities, and I can rattle off this year's annual priorities. We have a focus on math in the transition years from primary to intermediate, from 5th to 6th grade, from 8th to 9th grade. We have a priority on reading and writing across the curriculum and specifics around that, a priority focused on our multilingual learners, a priority focused on career readiness, and then generating local revenue would be our 5th priority, given the volatility of our finances due to declining enrollment. And then lastly, a priority around leadership development and succession planning. Our annual priorities, which are all aligned and connected to the broader strategic plan, really allow for us to have a more tactical focus in one year. As we implement the improvement work, we engage in a really collaborative process annually that involves the trustees, me, the superintendent, other district leaders, and we use data to commit to 5 to 6 priorities like the ones that I shared with you that have been driving the work in this respective year. And then to create a sense of accountability and to signal to our organization that these priorities are the school year's main to-do list, keeping the main thing, like the title of the report, we tether these priorities to the superintendent performance evaluation. So these priorities and the agreed upon success indicators for each of them are what I get evaluated on every year as the district superintendent. So I regularly provide updates on the progress that we're making on these priorities and success indicators in closed sessions to our board, publicly to our organization, because everyone is linked into these annual priorities in order to maintain that focus. We hold a mid-year check-in, we make any adjustments that might be necessary. And because they serve as the anchor of the superintendent evaluation process, our staff understands that they're really important. As board members get potentially distracted by other issues or initiatives, we come back to these priorities to center and focus our governance work. And it's really how we ensure the governance and district leadership is getting the most important work done to improve the educational outcomes for our students. But I'm going to let Robin sort of weigh in and share her perspective as a board member.
Thank you very much, Dr. Massetti. There's always a challenge in maintaining focus on our priorities while we pivot on strategy, timelines, and the rhythm of how we work as a governance team. But we do stay in our lane. And I think this structured system allows us to stay committed to work and role. The reality is if there is a divisive trustee or individual that does not support the agreed upon priorities, they eventually butt up against the system and integrate into the team. Because ultimately, strong individuals are usually outperformed by high functioning teams. We are consistently and thoroughly updated throughout the year with data, alignment strategies, and concise explanations of shifts in approach and resource allocations. We provide oversight, an understanding of the priorities, and a commitment to the implementation, but we do not create the condition or the tools of implementation. We sit outside the circle. Our job is to determine if the success indicators support the priority and if the priority is aligned with the strategic plan. So we as a board are given the resources to make thoughtful, informed decisions. And from my perspective, data is exceptionally powerful. There's no decision I'm afraid to make. Knowledge is an impenetrable suit of armor, I think, for board members. We are inundated with data to support our individual decisions in order to ultimately speak with one voice. And when superintendents invest in educating board members, it's like compound interest. It provides an enhanced rate of return. So ultimately, there is a deep appreciation, understanding of each of our very distinct roles. And that understanding allows us to address and navigate resistance. Data becomes the ultimate equalizer, and people can have divided opinions. But in the business of education, data allows us to make decisions that are grounded in the best interest of kids.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Rosanna. I wonder if I can pose a follow-up question. In some ways, it responds to something you alluded to, Robin, that there are pressures that can push board members, that can push districts away from their priorities. How do you respond to the pressures that come from outside the governance team, whether inside or outside the district, to consider or address new issues or programs that may not be aligned with the priorities that you've identified in Napa Valley Unified, or Nancy and Jose, the priorities you've identified in San Jose Unified?
Rosanna, would you like to go first? Would you like me to go first?
Yeah, I'll say something quickly, and then I think it's important for a board member to answer that, because I think the pressure really can be concentrated on the board members as they're out in the community. You know, for us, because we have this co-construction of the priorities with our governance team and our district leadership team, we land on those, we commit to them. That really becomes sort of our framework for protecting us from all of the random issues that can emerge. And sometimes board members want to deviate from that. They will get pressure in the community and they will feel like, Dr. Musetti, this is happening in the community. I think it's really important. Can we start addressing it today, yesterday, now? And we're able, because of that bought-in collective interest around the priorities, to use it as, but does it land in one of these 6 priorities in this respective year? And if it doesn't, and it's not something that, you know, because of unusual circumstances requires our immediate energy, time, attention, investment, resource, then we can use that to hold each other accountable. It really becomes the framework of operation. And so we use it to protect and buffer us from, you know, all of the politics of distraction that emerge as you're leading and governing in a school district. But I'd love for Robin to kind of share her perspective on how they serve her.
My answer becomes really repetitive because honestly, it can apply to almost any question that you ask me. Again, it's data, because there can be a myriad of conflicting opinions, requests, and demands on a school board. But I do feel like we can speak to any of those issues with competence, and the continuous layers of knowledge building gives us the confidence to do so. So we can keep true to our goals, our priorities, our norms. If the suggestion, the consideration is not aligned nor best practice, then I guess I don't look at that as pressure. I consider this process a learning opportunity for all involved. So the suggested consideration, they get dissected by a clear and concise process. And if the potential outcomes are not aligned, in my mind, it's easy to explain, as that process has created the roadmap to understanding. Yes, there's going to be dissension, but that is usually based on emotion and not facts, not data. And I can live with that, because if we've done the right thing on behalf of our students, then I guess my opinion is that should never be uncomfortable. And Dr. Musetti understands the most effective way to implement and exercises the patience and strategies to create the conditions and the environment for success. And this allows the board to be accountable to those inside and outside of the organizational structure. And I feel that we are successful because there is a distinct difference between buy-in of a vision and the comprehensive understanding of the components of a vision. And I think, and then what it takes to execute on that work. So our board is given, as I have repeatedly said, copious amounts of information to ensure we comprehensively understand the issue and the impact, short and long term, of all potential decisions, even those that are not necessarily what the community would like, the outcome that the community would like. And the challenge for superintendents, and I say this because I've watched Dr. Musetti kind of address these issues, conquer these issues, is superintendents have to be able to recognize vulnerabilities in the system. So dissect process, analyze tools, assess financial integrity, resource allocation, approach alignment, the list goes on. But until districts grapple with the underlying conditions, it is difficult to create priorities that can move districts forward. So we all set priorities to improve achievement for students, but achievement, and is not necessarily about percentage gains. It's without assessing conditions and direction, boards cannot do their work. They cannot address community input, their own sets of strategies and priorities. One is not independent of the other. So I just feel like we are well equipped with what we need to address any pressures that come our way.
Nancy or Jose, anything to add about the way you handle these competing pressures that sometimes exist in the work you do?
I can start. I think one of the things that's really, really important as you think about governance and this particular question, the pressures that the system has to navigate, both at the board level and at the staff level, is dramatically different than it was 10 years ago. And recognizing that this work of governance and alignment and coherence is ongoing work that has to happen on a daily basis. I know that's a big learning for me as a superintendent, when no other job has prepared me for this one, because you never have the insight around governance that you do in the superintendent role. I think that's one real important piece that I want to make sure I share as a learning of my own. But understanding that there's technical work to respond, and in that technical work you have, you point to your board bylaws, you stay focused on the role of the board and the priorities that they've set and bought into, their norms and their protocols about how decisions are made, and that, an individual trustee does not have authority, that as a collective, they have given direction, that the organization, the superintendent, then needs to operationalize those priorities that have been set at the board level. But I think the relational piece that needs to happen so that the board can respond when these pressures come is really being in tight communication. And as you're in consistent communication and learning about each other as people, you have a better sense of, how to respond to those pressures. And it's an opportunity to gain all this information that they need to be able to make decisions and respond to the pressures and the constituents. I think that a lot of the ideas that are presented to the board are great ideas. However, they need to be able to look at the big picture and then share. I need to be able to look at the big picture and then share with constituents the rationale for why we are doing what we're doing. And I think that is work that is hard to do, because there is the day-to-day, but this is strategic work that you have to work at every day, the technical and the relational, to be able to stay together and united when these pressures come, because they come every day.
Yeah, and on my end, I think Robin can attest to this as a school board member, but our roles are so localized. So we receive feedback, pressure, even solicitation from vendors at times, right? Whether it's on social media, in my case, at the flag salute event of my child's school, at the grocery store, having dinner with family, folks do come talk to you about what's happening and what is important to them. And I think a colleague mentioned this during the report, where they also mentioned too, running for office is also significantly different from legislating. There's a huge shift that occurs there. And for me, I think it's important to listen to folks and have them, hear out their suggestions and feedback. But as Robin named too, I think it's part of the work is providing some information to folks, reminding folks what the role is of the board, what we can do, what we can't do. The 3 votes piece that Nancy mentioned, our focus on the superintendent's management, the budget, and policy, and I just can't go open up the school after school. I can't do that as a board member, right? And that's part of the education that we're doing.
But why not?
Right. I understand too. Trust me, my kids ask me to open it up all the time if I could. But also tying back to folks and reminding them, many times they might not know what the district priorities are. And there's folks in the community that approach you who don't have children in the district, right? I think there's a stat that showed that I think 75% of voters don't have children in their district in San Jose. So there's a part of education that you have to take on there, and being okay with saying no at times, right? It's difficult as an elected official to tell people no, or not right now. But we have to be laser focused and as Robin named, if I have the data, if I have the information that I have, I can respond with no, or I can also say, let me get back to you on that. No commitment. I'm still, let me look into it. Which ties to the next piece is if there is something that I might be interested in, it may not be tied to the master plan or a strategic plan. So it is my job to make sure I reach out to the superintendent to connect with her to ensure and run by things. We operate under no surprises. And so in order to do this, I think this enables me to get the information, the data, the history that I need to make those decisions, and also to vet things. I'm not in the operations of things, and it might sound like a great idea, but at the end of the day, I might not know the entire system where a superintendent could say, actually, good idea, as Nancy was mentioning, great idea. But at the end of the day, it doesn't tie to our priorities, or there might be some things that we're not thinking through as we're proposing.
So it's really clear from listening to you all describe your work around priorities that it's not just about what you've chosen to work on in the district, but also the ways in which you deliberately engage in governance as a member of a team. I'd love to hear you describe for us a little bit more about that. What are the practices and norms that guide your work together? And how do you, as superintendent and a trustee team, understand and maintain focus on your respective roles? Maybe we can turn to the Napa Valley Unified team first. Rosanna and Robin, how does that play out in the way you design your work together?
Sure, that's such a great question. It is teamwork. In order for us, we talked about how we approach kind of keeping priorities top of mind, and our priority setting process, the one that we describe, it's really imperative in order to be able to move that work along and work in that way that you have to build a strong sense of team. So how do you, we have to constantly be asking ourselves this question: how do you cultivate a strong sense of team amongst a school board? And so developing shared norms for us has become critical to keeping a board functional versus dysfunctional, because there's so many opportunities to slip into dysfunction every day. And so in our experience, one of the most fundamental agreements that we have as a governance team is really understanding and committing clearly to the role and responsibilities of a trustee versus the role and responsibility of a superintendent and the administration. And I want to give sort of a shout out to the California School Boards Association, Luann Rivera. She was also in the study. She is our governance consultant. And one of the fundamental agreements that we work, it's one of our anchor agreements, is this role clarity. Without this fundamental understanding that trustees are to focus on policy, fiscal stewardship, and setting direction, it can become really tempting for board members to micromanage or engage in behaviors that lead to district dysfunction. For NVUSD, we recognize that when board members understand their role and they respect the role of the superintendent and their team, it allows for the superintendent to actually share information and knowledge with them as it's necessary for their decision making. The work that we've had to do here, we've had to make sure that our board members are highly informed, but I understand that superintendents can feel a lot of fear if there is not role clarity when you start sharing deeper and deeper levels of information with your trustees. There's a fear that they might get tempted to micromanage and lose sight of their role. So I can do this fearlessly because we do not have to worry here in NVUSD that trustees will use the information to micromanage or to step into the administrative operational arena. We can engage in consistent information dissemination, provide them that armor that they need as they engage with various constituency groups and the different demands and pressures that we've been talking about. And we also agree to work around the norm of no surprises. So role clarity, again, is essential when trustees and the superintendent are working closely together in this way. In addition, we've learned that in order to operate effectively, the trustees need to be willing to cultivate a respect for one another despite differences in political and philosophical views. And we have a spectrum of political and philosophical views on our board. Ultimately, this comes into play because trustees come to learn that as one person, they cannot accomplish anything. And we work kind of that concept in our norm development that we really, you know, when you gain that role clarity, you also come to understand that a school board needs to remember that they function as a collective and they do not have any authority as individuals. So that naturally sets the organic conditions for people to understand the value of team, because one person can't move any work forward for students. I'll just say that for us, you know, we conducted school closures and consolidation, very difficult work in response to dramatic declining enrollment. Our board members needed a lot of attention. They needed a lot of information dissemination to understand all of the various levels of decision-making that went into that difficult work. And without these norms, this role clarity, this respect, there's no way we would have been able to take that work to the finish line in order to keep our district stable so that we could fulfill our educational promise. I don't know, Robin, what would you like to add?
I mean, similarly, the establishment of our practices and norms really are our framework for our effective governance. It is the most important practice for any board, is clarity around roles and responsibilities. I will say that Dr. Massetti gets in the governance trench with us. She guides the initial onboarding, sets parameters, as well as mentors true understanding of protocols and expectations. And is there risk in this approach? Maybe. But I think there's a sweet spot, and a high functioning superintendent knows how to hold that line. We revisit our roles and responsibilities constantly. It becomes a practice, then becomes a norm. You know, we start every closed session with a verbal reading of one of our norms as a reminder, a boundary, and it gets traction and it becomes very powerful. And so to guide norms, we established a unity of purpose for our board, a strategic vision of what we want to accomplish, and the process of civility and professionalism to do so. So we have these created agreements, a governance handbook, and they're used to facilitate governance leadership through these very clearly defined norms and protocols, which, as Dr. Massetti said, it allows us to function collaboratively as a governance team. We have 7 explicit team norms that allow us to develop then specific meeting guidelines. And this ensures that all members of the team are operating within their agreed upon roles. And I think that's really important. An integral piece of the productive norms is they ultimately, as all of us have said, they foster trust, alignment, and cohesion. And I do think this is exceptionally important for a superintendent like Dr. Massetti, who relies on her board to honor confidentiality of the vast amount of data that she's willing to share.
Great. Nancy or Jose, anything you would add about the way that norms are developed or play out in the San Jose Unified context?
We do many of the same practices that Napa does, I know, and I want to echo the shout out to the California School Boards Association. Luann Rivera, Deb Dudley has worked with our team and developed their governance handbook. And you know, it's something that I think is really important to do because it's an opportunity for board members to come together and recommit if they are, you know, continuing board members, and anybody that's new to have the opportunity to outline their objectives, their needs, their challenges, their hopes, what would they like to accomplish as a board this next cycle. So I think that taking the time to have those discussions and recommitting every time somebody is new to the team. But I think the other piece that really needs to be emphasized is that, you know, everyone's a learner in this process, you know, from the superintendent to all the trustees. It's important that we take a learner stance and that we learn from, you know, mistakes that have happened in the past, learn from those that do have really strong governance practices, and continue to have discussions about how do we get better. I think that and this is really for superintendents, sometimes we go through training programs or workshops where there is this desire to have really clear roles and everybody staying in their roles. The board is the policy level, the superintendents, you know, implement policy and handle the day-to-day of the district. I can understand why some organizations have to have really clear boundaries there. in San Jose, given our context and our history, we blur the lines. I do believe that that is something that is important to do here, because I have a lot of confidence and a lot of trust with the board that they understand their role and can come with me to school sites and see the things that they are voting on, ethnic studies coursework, transitional kindergarten materials. They can walk those classrooms and see the things that they're about to have discussions about without concern that they may, engage in micromanagement at the school site level. But I think having those opportunities to talk about roles and responsibilities and agree that we are going to stay in those roles with the understanding that we're going to share information and be respectful about the need for confidentiality around a lot of the information that's being shared. So I know that isn't the case everywhere. In some places, given the context that, this work is happening in, they need to create very clear boundaries and not have any crossover. But we do have a lot of crossover here simply because we have a lot of trust and confidence that we can do that because of the commitment to the roles and the norms.
And I'll quickly add too, I think as a board, we have fully committed to being as prepared as we can for our meetings, for our students, our staff, and when we're making decisions, so that we feel confident with that. And I'm proud to say I think all 5 of our board members have completed CSBA's Masters of Governance course. That gives us that guidance and understanding of what our roles really are and what they're not, right? And being able to bounce ideas off other fellow board members throughout the state was beneficial, and a lot of us actually did that together as well. And then I'd say too, on top of that, some of us have completed courses through Georgetown's Education Lab or Ed Lab in board finances. I got my certificate in education finance from there, just so that we can continue to build our capacity and understanding as a board and to share that knowledge with one another. Because one quick thing that I think our superintendent does very well is when we're assigned committees, whether it's CACSI, DLAC, the policy committee, it's based off board member strengths and things that we're really interested in. And so when we're able to come back, it's exciting. We're able to provide information to our fellow board members and continue to really understand what our roles are even amongst those committees.
Great. One observation we heard from multiple interview respondents is that when you have a new board member join the governing team, you have an entirely new governing team. So we're hearing you describe all the things that are in place for what now for each of you is a pretty well-established board. You've all been working together. Even your newest members have been there for over a year. We also know we're in an election year, and every election year introduces a potential change on the board. And there are implications for those regular transitions for a commitment to shared norms and priorities. So we heard from both districts about some of the strategic approaches to onboarding that are designed to cultivate an effective working team in the ways that you've been describing so far. I'm mindful of our time and want to make sure we have time for Q&A. So knowing that this is a set of strategies in both districts, maybe for the purposes of time, I'll turn to the San Jose Unified team here, and I'd love to hear more about the approaches to onboarding that you've employed in San Jose and why they're important to the work that you're doing as a governing team.
Okay, I just really quickly on the onboarding. And again, I've done this for 8 years now in this role. And so it has gotten better each year. I would say where we are today from year one is dramatically different, but I do believe that onboarding is really, really important. And so the way we have made modifications here is every new trustee that joins the board has the same the same onboarding and access to information. So we spend a lot of time going through the board bylaws. The 9,000s are really important. The handbook, the board handbook. In addition to that, we do meetings with every department where a lot of the processes live, so that they have an opportunity to hear from the directors that lead in those departments, can have that discussion about what are the priorities there, how does that department support the school site work, and then also a second board member, usually the board president, joins them in those meetings, so they have time with staff and another trustee to be able to engage in that learning. And then of course we come together as a team to be able to do our Good Beginnings workshop. That's just one thing that we do here that really I think is
Hey, Jose, anything you would add from your perspective and your role as a board member in this onboarding process?
Yeah, I think that similar to what our superintendent did with me, where we had a one-on-one where we talked about my why, the goals, the priorities that I had. I took a similar approach with my colleagues, where Dr. Massetti was saying this earlier. One person can't do anything alone, right? So I'm going to need collaboration across the board, and I'm always going to seek a win-win as best as we can, and that means figuring out other folks' priorities, other folks' why, and trying to align those again to our district priorities, but how we can work together and get policy going forward. And similar, our board, we don't all agree on everything on when it comes to politics and policy, but even with that, we've had folks with completely opposing views on some issues working together to champion issues. And that ultimately is because we actually took that intentional time to get to know each other and understand our whys and how we can actually connect that to our day-to-day work that we're doing as board members.
And Robin and Rosanna, I know the work that you're doing in Napa Valley Unified to onboard people looks very similar to some of the things in San Jose. Just not sure, wanted to know if there's anything you would add to the conversation based on your experiences or anything that resonates.
I can add one thing that is a little bit different perspective is that I started before Dr. Massetti was the superintendent. I started under a different superintendent. And I would just like to add the perspective of I did not get 1 ounce of onboarding. I got hello, and there's the boardroom, and not much more than that. And I'm not exaggerating. And trustees cannot self-train. It's not smart for the trustee, and it's not good for the district. So I have to applaud both superintendents that have an extensive onboarding process, because I've been able to witness what it's like to watch another individual go through it. And it's a far more seamless experience for them, but it also gives them such a a perspective, an ability to understand when you first walk into a board meeting. It changes the dialogue in the room. And so I'm in big support of what both districts are doing. It is a very difficult process to enter with no guidelines.
It's easy to hear you all describe your work and believe that you live in some kind of utopia. But we know the work is challenging. And we also know the reality is in any large community, some difference of opinion is inevitable and will often make its way to the school board. We know that neither San Jose Unified nor Napa Valley Unified is immune from controversy. And the report identifies a couple of specific examples where that's played out in your communities. But we'd love to hear you share your insights about how you navigate issues that have the potential to be divisive and to generate resistance within members of your communities and among people who have voted you into your positions. How do you navigate those things?
I'll kick off and then I'll toss really quickly. I think you've heard the theme throughout for us, and you can definitely look at our local newspaper and you will see that controversy continues. We're in the thick of some of it right now. And for us, it's really data-driven decision making and making sure that our school board members are really educated, really informed, and develop a deep understanding of the issue. I feel that when the board members have a depth of understanding around the issues and they've been afforded the opportunity to really understand the data behind the recommendations that staff are making, which are not always going to be popular. In fact, often they are going to elicit a high degree of dissatisfaction with a proportion of the community. I was like, Nancy and I are, coached colleagues, friends, and she's always reminding me about the silent majority, right? We don't tune into the silent majority. It's easy to tune into the loudest voices of dissatisfaction. But in my experience with the difficult work we've had to do in right-sizing our district that involved some of the hardest work around closing schools, 2 rounds within a 2-year period, middle schools and elementary schools, contentious issues with charter schools, the board members, because of their depth of understanding around the issue, they are able to vote, do the right thing for the district, for the 16,000 students, not just for a small segment of those 16,000 students, and then use the data to communicate the rationale of their votes, of their decisions when they're in the grocery store, like Jose said. So I continue to just really lean into that being very fundamental. Superintendents have to invest a lot of time in informing and educating their trustees on the issues.
I mean, it's just, we say the same thing over and over and over again. And there are a lot of different ways to do it. There's all the training. We have study sessions. We do one-on-ones. We all have the opportunity to, after each board packet or some issue, we have the opportunity to email questions to the superintendent prior to, our board meetings. We have access to all the information we need. And if we don't, we have the opportunity to ask for such. So as I've said, repeatedly throughout every single answer, having access to data is really the only tool you need to combat any pushback. They may not like the response, but if you're grounded in the information that best supports kids and the foundation of your district, then you're doing the right thing. And like I said, that should never be uncomfortable.
So I'd encourage people to look at the full report, because I think there's a couple of specific examples. One, in Napa Valley Unified, Rosanna mentioned the school consolidation, and I think the very painful decision that the governing team made in that area. We also heard about a challenge in San Jose Unified around the presence of school resource officers from the San Jose Police Department on school campuses. It encouraged people to look into the report for more details about that. I wanted to bring up a question that isn't necessarily explored in the report, which is, we know that in many districts, dysfunctional labor relationships can be at the root of a lot of the disagreements and controversies that governing teams and school board members need to navigate. Would love to hear you talk a little bit about how the role of relationships among the board, the central office, and your labor unions plays in the way that your governing teams operate, and how it navigates controversy, or is able to keep controversy at bay.
I think I can start with that. I think Trustee Magana alluded to this earlier. We were a district in the 80s that had major labor strife, bankruptcy, court order to desegregate the schools. So it was not a good time. And so here we know that our context matters and that we know what rock bottom feels like. So really understanding that our workforce, our people, are the most important and valuable resource we have to be able to change outcomes for students. And so there is a lot of discussion that happens up front when we do our onboarding to understand and agree that that is a very powerful lever that we have, our workforce. And so just thinking about that and understanding the positional authority that management and the board have, how do we create collaboratively with our labor groups the conditions for the employees to do the best work so that our students can do their best learning? All of those pieces are connected. And so we spend time very publicly acknowledging that we recognize 80% of our budget is people. And so we have to engage in collaboration and in conversations about how do we do this work together, because it's really, really hard work. And that commitment to staying in the conversation, even when we don't have complete agreement around, how to move forward. But I think there is a mutual understanding here in San Jose that we need to do this hard work together, and really leaning into our values, our beliefs, our areas of shared commitment to be able to the tension that sometimes comes up in the relationship. I know that isn't the case everywhere, but we really believe in being learners and learning from what happened in the past and making sure that that doesn't happen. So we stay in conversation regardless of how hard it gets, because we believe that our labor groups also want the same thing, for students to be able to learn and learn in high levels. And how do we collaboratively create those conditions for that to move forward?
I would just, on the NVUSD side, there are some similarities, I think, with San Jose Unified and Napa Valley Unified, and that might be, a thought, an area of exploration. Similarly to SJUSD, we do have collaborative relationships with our labor partners. And, you know, we're a salary formula district, so that's a distinction that I just want to be very candid about, that I think relieves a lot of the pressures that school boards and district leadership teams find themselves dealing with. This is my 4th school district. I have worked in districts as a executive cabinet, you know, deputy superintendent, and had to work on that relationship and turn it around in order to advance the improvement agenda in service to students. So I know the kind of spectrum of environments when it comes to labor and the opportunities and challenges that sometimes brings. And here in NVUSD, similarly, decades ago, there was strife, there was a verge of a strike, and the organizations, the associations, and the school district came together and wanted to find a new path forward. And we've been at that for 30 years and working to maintain that. We actually are a district that uses interest-based problem solving as our framework and methodology for negotiating. So we are unique in that way. It does give us a strategic advantage, I think, when we're doing the governance work. And I think working in those different environments, I would echo what Superintendent Alberon said, is that, you know, it's very easy for us to sort of power down and not lean into the relationships, even when they're fraught with challenge and disagreement. But because 80 to 85% of what we do is around people, our discussions with the school board, with the governance team, is often about how do we create conditions for our employees across the labor unions to feel like they are at the center of the improvement agenda for our students, and how are your decisions in improving and impacting the working conditions for all of our labor groups that all make a contribution to student achievement.
So I see some questions coming through, and I want to turn to those so we can give an opportunity for you all to respond to some of the questions that are coming up from our attendees. Before we do that, I want to close with a final question, which is, and I'll offer some context. I think one consistent message we've heard in the work of the collaborative over the years is how important it is to make sure that improvement approaches are appropriate and responsive to the local context. And we know, again, reference to the media reports, we don't have to look very far at all to recognize that other districts might operate in environments with very different strengths, challenges, histories, and political dynamics. And those play out in school board races, they play out in school board meetings. So, you know, we're living in a time of political polarization that's becoming more elevated as we get into the intense phases of an election year. And that there are individuals and groups that are prioritizing disruption over collaboration at all levels of our system, including the work of school boards. And so thinking about the unique ways that the Napa Valley Unified and San Jose Unified history and context enables you to do the work that you do, but also thinking about those pressures that may be entering in more profound or noticeable ways in your communities, and thinking about other communities where those pressures are already existing in full force and have already, you know, caused a lot of disruption. How do you think about those threats, and what advice do you offer to other governing teams in contexts where those threats are more palpable?
I guess I can start us on this one. So I think this is just, you know, a new reality that we're all experiencing. You know, having been a superintendent pre-COVID, it was very different then. But I do have to say that one of the things that I think is most important is really understanding what your vision is. And in San Jose, it's preparing today's students to be the thinkers, leaders, and creators of tomorrow, and having a lot of clarity with the board that our role in public education is to prepare our students to be the critical thinkers, not telling them what to think, but really making sure that they leave our system with the skills to be able to think critically and to be able to contribute in very meaningful ways in whatever community that they live in, whether it be in San Jose or anywhere in the world, that they are prepared to make some good decisions and contribute in meaningful ways. And I think staying focused on that idea of not telling students what to think, but helping them have the skills to be able to make good decisions is really, really important. And so every time an agenda is coming our way, we have to ask ourselves, is this aligned with our primary responsibility of preparing our students to be critical thinkers. And I think a lot of times that helps us, make determinations. We all have political leanings and beliefs, but I think really making sure that we stay within our sphere of influence of preparing students to be critical thinkers.
Yeah, sorry, I'll say on my end, I see these also just as opportunities, right? Because see my family members and their experience in the educational system. I understand some of their distrust, but you're right, Joel. There's some folks that are just looking to create that chaos and fear. And actually, we've had to address that as a board with some of the threats that have come to our board, our staff, and some of our families. But again, I think this can lead to an opportunity for us to really show that these systems can work and that chaos is what leads to less opportunity for our students. And so for me, I really try to lead with this concept of, model what you would want to see. Be the board member that you wanted as a kid. Be the board member that you wanted while you were teaching in the classroom. Be the board member that you would want as a parent of kids in the district. And I said this, I think, on a panel before, when I talked about, I don't believe in trickle-down economics, but I do believe in trickle-down culture when it comes to school districts, where if the board is dysfunctional, it's going to lead to more dysfunction, a lack of trust, and just negative culture at the district level with our administrators. If that's happening there, more than likely our principals and our site administrators are also feeling the same and are not feeling supported. And if they're feeling that, likely our teachers are not feeling supported and are feeling that dysfunction. And as a new parent in the school district with kids in the district, I know that parents could feel that too if there's dysfunction that's happening. And so for me, I really tell folks, like, let's stay the course with some short and long-term wins that are aligned to our vision, that are aligned to our priorities, so that we can make some changes in the system, right? And also have some influence at the local level. But we've said this earlier, in the ongoing theme around data and information is key, right? I think that ties to the last piece, is trying to be as proactive as possible with communication and combating misinformation with information. So combating that chaos with actually the truth, combating that fake news with what's actually happening, combating that chaos with actual progress and showing growth in our district and in our sites. And I think too, going back to it, expecting the same thing that we would want in our classrooms as a board member, as a board high functioning that is really focused on work and learning, is basically what I would do in these spaces.
Thank you, Jose. Rosanna or Robin, any insights on how you think about the threats of chaos in your own environment, or advice that people in other contexts might be able to draw from the example in Napa Valley Unified?
Yeah, I think what comes to mind, as I approach wrapping up my 6th year, is 2 concepts of acceptance and anticipation. I think that when I first started as a new superintendent, I expended a lot of energy and sometimes brought the board into that, kind of into investing energy in trying to, do as much as possible to sort of prevent disruption and or threats, right? And I think I would echo with Nancy. I have less years before COVID than she does, but post-COVID, it's just, I think we have to accept that is the landscape, that is the reality. And so when you start to work from a position or a philosophy of acceptance around that, then you are, you're not kind of overworking or putting energy in a place to try and avoid any, leaky holes, and understand that it's not, oh, is it going to come? It's coming, that's part of the work. We know it's here. And so can we expend some energy, some strategy around anticipation? That's kind of the second concept I named. Yes, we can anticipate, we can be strategic in that anticipation, and then work to find ways of possibly building relationships, closing information gaps, disrupting mythology, all of the things. But I think for me, the biggest piece when I work with the board is like, we're about to engage in some really difficult work. And up front, we just have to accept there are going to be threats to it. There are going to be opposers. There are going to be disruptors. That is the work. That is the work of leadership today. That is the work of governance today. And we have fear. We feel threatened. We feel emotional and angry as we're kind of criticized and targeted. And we have to support each other, going back to that team. We go back to team and we support each other, and we realize we have to remind each other that is the work. We don't need to spin around it. We need to stay focused. Like Trustee Magaña said, we just need to stay focused on our core values, our mission, our priorities. If we pick the right things for students and we're investing in the right things to improve education for students, we need to just stay centered around that, and accept what is. That is the landscape of governance and leading schools in today's world.
I mean, I would just add that this is the job we were elected to do. Like everyone has said, we can diffuse, we can provide context, information. It may or may not work, but at the end of the day, our job is to professionally interact, collaborate effectively, and work efficiently to promote advancement towards our district goals. And having our established priorities and norms provide us the appropriate context to do so. And when there's pushback, there's dissatisfaction, as Rosanna said before, that might be the loudest voice in the room. We can temper it possibly, we can diffuse it possibly. We have a lot of different methodologies to do so, but at the end of the day, doing good work, doing the right work, that's the real diffusion to me. Doing what we think is in the best interest of kids may calm the dissension or it may not. But ultimately, if we have done the right thing and how we're serving our community, I think that will ultimately be the loudest voice in the room.
Thank you so much. I mean, this is such fantastic advice and perspectives. I want to turn to a couple of the questions that have come up from our participants. One was submitted, actually, there are two, I think, related questions, and they connect directly to some of what we've heard. We've heard you all describe ways in which data that you collect at a district level helps to inform and drive the priorities you've established in both of your systems. We've also heard a way in which data becomes armor almost in navigating and a tool for navigating some of the controversy that inevitably comes up in the decisions you make in the work that you do. So let me pose these two questions, which I think are related. The first question, which was submitted ahead of time, which is, how are data and data analysis used in addressing and remediating issues of academic underperformance by school student groups? And then the second question, somebody said, I can appreciate the reliance on data, but the truth is, this is a business of people, and there are instances where things come up when we don't have data, we don't have the answer. So how do you prioritize when resources will be used to acquire data necessary to make a decision? So welcome any insights to either or both of those questions around data.
Well, go ahead.
Stab at.
Yeah,
the second question is relevant. I mean, there are going to be, this is also a relationship business. So while I do think that the data piece is an incredibly important component to being informed and to be able to address issues as they come up, there are issues where we either have to acquire data or the issue at hand is maybe emotion driven, or it's a very specific circumstance, and the data that we as a district have may not apply to something with that much specificity. And many times those, and I don't know what this particular person is alluding to, but many times those aren't actually a priority or a goal. It may just be a want or a need in that moment. And I think those can be addressed without kind of the data scaffolding that we're referencing, throughout this dialogue, that there are some issues that come to bear that if we have to get data, we will, or given on institutional knowledge, experience, having context in something else that might apply. You can use logic, reasoning, and thoughtful care to address issues that come out that data can't support. And I think that happens all the time. It's just the bigger question is Is this something that influences what we do as a district? Is this a goal, a priority? And then how do we address it within the context of, what is in the best interest of the district and moves the district forward?
I think the only piece that I would add to that is that I think what can happen a lot within communities as they navigate issues related to their schools is the community can become very myopic around, what's happening in our community. And they can lose sight of what that means relative to maybe school performance across the state and the country, or maybe even within our county, or, the financial circumstances that are being faced to the left and the right of us. So I know something that we try to do to kind of broaden the trustee perspective so that they are not getting kind of dragged into what sometimes can be, very sort of myopic thinking, is we try and also provide them with, comparative data and benchmark data, so that they have a broader sense of kind of where we lie, because a lot of the times community dissatisfied stakeholders, so we've talked about those threats, will often weaponize our data against us and not putting it in a broader perspective. And so we often like to make sure that, part of that armor is our trustees who do govern at the local level. And we are huge advocates of local control and people representing their community, but also understanding that if they're going to govern at the local level, they do have to have a broader perspective than just what's here. And so that's really served them well, I think, in navigating threats and making difficult decisions.
I guess just one thing that I think San Jose can add is that I think our board is very mindful that, there's the data that we get from the state that's presented very publicly, but there's also a lot of other data that we pay attention to. And I think our board is very disciplined about not making decisions for the district based on public comment or, what's on Nextdoor or what is on social media, but really going and seeking input from diverse, our community is very diverse ethnically and socioeconomically. And so it's a real danger in a district like ours, in any district, but I think in ours in particular, where you have a portion of the district that is very privileged and with a part of the district that there's a lot of need. And so being really clear about having a pulse on what's happening in the district, and what a lot of them do, they are in the community, they go to school events, they are talking and getting feedback from people that are not emailing, that are not at public comment or on social media, but really going and seeing from people, because I think we have to remember that the public sector in general is under attack. There's not one institution that people are saying, yeah, that they're crushing it, and remembering that and seeing that a lot of our families are incredibly grateful. Our students are achieving, and really there are caring adults with them every day, making them helping them navigate learning and becoming better people. So I think I hear from a lot of parents when I'm out at schools or when I'm talking, to the community in various settings. So it's really important that we are data collecting and bringing that perspective as decisions are being made.
Don't you think part of that, and Jose, you've alluded to it many times during your comments, is that we do become listeners? I mean, in all of our capacities, and part of that, when we talk about data comes in a lot of different forms. And so part of, I think, our responsibility is to listen to our communities. And even with all the data we receive in all of our other, parts of our responsibilities and our process and our jobs, is the one-on-ones in the community, or going, even when we go to, if Dr. Massetti has a town hall or is doing a coffee with the superintendent, or we happen to be at a school gathering, or any community event, there's always opportunities to, yes, speak and engage, but there's also an infinite amount of opportunities to listen. And I think that discipline becomes really important in understanding what community need is, and how we react and when we react or if we react.
I know I spoke, but I just want to do a quick plug there. Trustee Jankwitz is really good at that. She's one of our expert listeners on the team. Even when we were doing the difficult work of school closure consolidation, she committed to like a coffee, a one-on-one with any dissatisfied constituent. It met individually with so much one-on-one. And so I think to Nancy's point around gathering qualitative data, you know, out in that way, as a member of the governance team really goes a long way. And the key strategy to that is being an effective listener. You may not give them the decision they want, but often if they feel heard, that will, at least the decision will be respected.
So there's one more question that's been posed about onboarding that I want to come back to, but specifically on this point, somebody is offered a follow-up question, which says, I love Robin's comment on listening. She read my mind. I'm interested in hearing a practice that each of you uses to ensure you are effectively listening to different perspectives from yours. And how are you intentional about using language that is inviting versus divisive? And the person says, please be as specific as possible. So I wonder if anybody could give us just a short snippet of a practice that you employ or a piece of advice you would offer in response to that question.
I mean, for me, it's just very intuitive. I mean, you get into a situation, you let the individual speak first. Rosanna always says something that is so wonderful. She'll have a conversation and somebody will say something and she'll say, tell me more. And she uses it all the time, but it allows somebody to feel safe when you look in the eye, when you ask clarifying questions, when they know that you came to care. I think the listening piece becomes the easiest part of the puzzle. The hard part is getting them to a point where they're willing to share in a manner that's going to be effective for both parties. And so I think supportive comments along the way. So if somebody is very critical of a decision, instead of me feeling defensive and saying, yes, but we're doing it because why, I will say, what is the impact of this decision on you? What is your discomfort? And whatever the issue is, we're closing schools. Tell me what you don't think you're going to be able to achieve for your child at, school X, whatever it is, whatever the prompt is. And if you listen from the onset, it allows you to ask questions that are meaningful to them. And at the end, when you've been able to kind of comprehensively understand what, all of that individual's issues are, your answer can be far more succinct and thoughtful, and it can really address what they might ask in their initial questions may not really be what their concerns or fears are. So if you can engage in a conversation long enough, then you can kind of decipher what it is that they need or they're afraid of, or whatever the guiding issue is. So maybe I'm simplifying it too much, but that seems to work.
Just something I'm kind of giggling about this topic because Trustee Magana and I like to share resources, and we're both research nerds, so we share, email, text each other things and he had shared with me a resource that had been talking about listening, and there was a book that he shared with me, and I got to it, so we were texting about it this weekend. So it was really nice to know that all of us are thinking about that. How do we be better listeners, especially in this context and in this time? I think really when you listen and you empathize and you ask questions and then you collaboratively problem solve, it goes a long way with people, your constituents. I think in the listening phase, really thinking about not necessarily the position, especially if it's around somebody that's dissatisfied, the position that they want you to take or something they want you to do, but listening for the interest, like what's sitting underneath this? What is this tied to? What do you, because I a lot of times if you can get to the interest, you care about the same thing. And so acknowledging that we have a shared interest in this, and how do we then get to a place where we can understand the approaches that we're about to engage in to address a concern or an idea. I think that is something that, given people are so, the time is a constraint. A lot of times we don't practice a good listening simply because of time, not because of disinterest. And I think that we just have to be more disciplined around that as trustees, as superintendents, as staff, because I think we have a lot in common with people more than not.
And if I can quickly add on that too, I think in order to be able to listen fully with someone, you kind of need to know someone's why and some of their story. And onto Superintendent Avedon's point, time is of the essence, but taking those 5-10 minutes to get to know each other a little bit more, just on a personal level. What brings you here? Tell me about your kids. Let me tell you why I ran for school board and what I'm passionate about, starts to build some of that connection to be able to have those difficult conversations, but also to be able to listen better and to pick up on those things. And I think another thing that I have been comfortable with doing too is I'm upfront with folks that I'm always going to seek a win-win. But in some cases, there may be a no deal where we have to come back to the drawing board and revisit the issue. And so ultimately, my goal is for us to find a win-win, but at the same time, we might not find full agreement. But the goal of building the connections, of listening, is to find at least one thing that we can do to keep the conversation going, to keep it from getting divisive, and to focus on keeping it productive.
I'd love to close with the final question that we got in the Q&A. And I think it connects back to this approach of onboarding and bringing new members onto a team that haven't been part of a team before. And the question somebody posed is, what is the most effective way for a new school board trustee who has won election over an incumbent to develop genuine relationships with existing trustees who may range in perspectives from happy to not happy about the election results, with an eye towards successful governance at time of transition? And Robin and Jose, I'd love to hear your perspectives, having been on at least one side of this occasion, of this equation, I imagine, at some point during your tenure on the school board.
Jose, would you like to start?
Sure. I'll take a jab at it. So I did not win an election over an incumbent, but I will say I was not the choice of some of my colleagues on the board my first time around. So there was definitely some tension. Some of my colleagues knocked on doors for my opponents, and we didn't meet eye to eye on a lot of things. But I want to emphasize, I'm looking at the Q&A, the piece that you put, which is develop genuine relationships. Like, that takes time. It could take a lot of time, right? And again, getting to know each other, getting to know our why outside of what's being discussed in the political sphere, but actually let's sit down and talk about who we are as people and what we want to work on. Because at the end of the day, again, one person alone cannot do things, especially if you are quote unquote by yourself. If you're not aligned with anyone, it makes the work even that more difficult, which is not fair to the folks who just elected you to office. So for me, I took that intentional time to sit down with folks who I didn't necessarily agree with, to sit on committees with them, to get coffee with them, to really understand who we were as people, because we quickly realized that the stuff that was being discussed in political circles just was not the reality, right? We got to actually know each other and work on policy together. And now, it switched. We went from knocking on doors for opponents to being the ones that were doing the speeches at folks' campaign kickoffs, to working productively on items that folks would say like, whoa, you two are working together on this? But again, that took time, that took effort, that took really intentional. And then the big piece was the genuine piece. It wasn't just, I'm doing this because I want to get policy wins, but I really want to get to know you. And at the end of the day, if we can't work well together, that's not good for kids. And as someone who's a parent of kids in the school district, and to my points earlier, we need to be functioning, because our kids, our staff, our community will lose if we fight.
I agree, and we have a similar practice. But I will also add, during our CSBA training, I think there are some really special kind of procedures that we do year after year. And it's really important during a year where we onboard new trustees. And Luann, she will ask us to talk about something that is special to us. She will ask us very specific personal questions. Why did we want to be on the board? What is one fact about us that another trustee might not know? What it was a guiding force for something? A million different questions, but we go around the room and she really personalizes the onboarding experience. I remember the first year we did it, and people were sharing very deep stories, and I didn't know what to share. There was this little feeling of discomfort, and I was not the new person in the room, but you're so aware of your words. And what I loved was it created a vulnerability. It allowed us to connect as humans and not trustees. It allowed us to speak about education and why it was important, but we also got to speak a little bit about ourselves so that we identified ourselves individually and within the context of being on a board. Dr. Massetti was in the room, she participated, and it was just one of the activities that I think are really important during the CSBA onboarding process that allows that relationship building to begin. We are, you know, we too have asked each other to coffee and do all of those things, and we all work on it. The norms really do become a part of it, because it's not like we sit down and say, I want this norm to be number 7. I mean, we dissect each norm. What does this mean to us? What is its application? Will it be impactful? Can we live by this? Is this something that we believe in as individuals? And what will it do for us as a governing group, since we really, at the end of the day, speak with one voice? So I do believe when you have a set process, it gives you those boundaries to be vulnerable and to talk about what is important. And that gives everybody the understanding that, okay, we are in this together and we can do this. And there will be differences, and we still see them as what I consider a high functioning board. We still see flare ups of those differences, but we are now equipped to honor those differences rather than be defensive of those differences. And when you can do that as an individual, as a professional, and I hope as an adult, it allows you over time to be a better, stronger, higher functioning team.
It's a beautiful way to close this, Robin. I want to end sort of where we began, which is to acknowledge that there's not widespread understanding of what it takes to be an effective governing team in a school district. And I think we're grateful for the opportunity to learn from the work that you're doing and to better understand the service that you're giving to the members of your community, and most importantly, to the students in your community. So I want to thank all of you for what you're doing as board members and as superintendents. And I also want to thank you for your generosity of your time and energy to be able to share that story more broadly. And hopefully we can start to balance some of the story of the dysfunction and the battles, which are a reality that we have to confront, to your point, Rosanna, with the stories that we can learn from about the ways that committed adults can work together in service of their students and their community. So Superintendent Massetti, Trustee Jakowitz, Trustee Magana, and Superintendent Albaran, I can't thank you enough, and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. And thank you so much for spending your time with us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.